It's not easy being the last speaker after such a fantastic weekend, a fantastic rally that we've just had, and perhaps particularly the speaker from another country, electronically delivered, working in far more difficult conditions than we are here in Britain. And I know, not only by your yawns and the expressions on your faces, but also because of all the work that you've been doing, that comrades here are very tired. We have put, as a party, a large amount of effort into making this weekend the great success that it has been. Above all, of course, the Jarrow marchers themselves have put a huge effort, walking over 5 weeks to this weekend. But I don't normally praise individuals in a speech like this, but I would also just like to briefly mention when Sean Figg, who's done the Jarrow March, who is the organiser of socialism, went away to march from Jarrow back to London, then a rather older organiser of the Socialist Party, Steve Glennon, has stepped in and done a fantastic job organising socialism. If you see Steve, he might have been sitting in an office, but he's limping around. We finished him off organising socialism, but anyway. But although you're tired, and I'll speak briefly, I do just want to make a few concluding points. First of all, probably most of you haven't had time to look at the newspapers today, but if you do, you'll see that Miliband has had a conversion not on the road to St Damascus, but on the road to St Paul's. Because he's in the Observer today, giving an interview which claims to be supporting the St Paul's occupation. He goes on to stick the knife in because he calls them confused and accuses them of putting forward impractical proposals. It's a little bit of a chink. It's confused would be a very polite term for an interview in which he manages to talk about how a Labour government would create jobs at the same time as saying it would continue to carry out huge cuts in public spending. And impractical would be a very polite term for someone who imagines, who argues that it's possible to separate good, productive capitalism from the finances and the speculators and the irresponsible capitalists. That at a time when the so-called responsible capitalists have £60 billion sitting in their vaults in Britain, which they're not investing in production because it isn't profitable to do so. And that at the same time as the finances are so powerful, finance capital is so powerful today that you can have all of the global economic powers, the capitalist governments, meeting together in the G20, and they're incapable of finding a way to prevent the finance markets threatening the future existence of the Eurozone. So it's very impractical what Miliband is saying. By the way, on the question of the Eurozone, this is an aside, partly referring to some of the points that Alex made, but what's taking place now does confirm everything that the Socialist Party has argued at the CWI over the last years. Because the capitalists' overconfidence, their hubris in the time of the boom, meant that they really imagined that globalisation would go on forever, that they could overcome the limits of the nation-state and the Eurozone, and we argued, against many others on the left, that that was not the case. They could get away with it in a boom, but once the economic crisis hit, all of the problems would come to the fore. That the Eurozone would not last, and it won't, but also that even the EU itself could be threatened by the crisis that will come out of the Eurozone, and that is posed in the future period. We agree with Alex completely. The EU is a boss's club. The capitalist classes of Europe use its rules, its laws, in order to increase exploitation of working class people across Europe, with people being paid the wages of the lowest wage economies and all of the other rules that they have. If Dave Nellis was still an MP in Parliament now, as we hope he will be again in the future, then we wouldn't have done what Labour did. when there was a vote on the referendum, where they were pathetic. I mean, they didn't even abstain in order to maximise the problems for Cameron. They vote in favour, or they vote against there being a referendum. We would have voted in favour of a referendum. We are not in favour of the EU bosses club. But what do we put as the alternative? We have to raise the idea of a socialist United States of Europe, of the idea of workers across Europe coming together. And let's face it, today, when in Greece, in Ireland, in Spain, in Portugal, in Britain, workers are all facing the same attacks raining down on them, then those kind of ideas, the idea of workers' unity, a workers' Europe, can gain a greater popular echo than has been the case for many years. There is undoubtedly a growing anti-capitalist mood, not just across Europe, but also in Britain. When you get Miliband, no matter how mealy-mouthed away he does it, saying that he's going to support St Paul's is because he knows it's popular, and it's an indication of the mood in society. When you get the Observer, has got a feature today, a discussion on can we put the morality back into capitalism, that is a reflection of the fact that it's becoming widely understood that capitalism is immoral. There is a growing understanding that this is not just an episodic economic crisis, but is a reflection of capitalism being a bankrupt system. And after all, that is why the St Paul's protesters have such popular support, despite the fact that they are sometimes a bit confused. I had a very frustrating experience the other week. I hope Judy's not going to switch the mic off on me if I stick to time. But the other week I was on Radio 5 and they did switch the mic off on me and I couldn't get in and I was fuming trying to get into the debate because there was this St Paul's protester, a very well-meaning, I'm sure, young woman, but they kept saying to her, what do you stand for? What's your programme? And she kept saying, it's for the Assembly to decide. And then they said, yes, but for you as an individual, what do you think? And she said, there's no I in Occupy. I can't give you my individual opinion. And she just refused to put forward a programme, and I couldn't get in to put forward a socialist programme. But the point of the story is even Radio 5 Live, which is, if you phone in regularly, I don't mean to cause offence, but it is often right-wing cranks who phone in to Radio 5 Live. Not everybody, but on this occasion it wasn't. It was overwhelming workers supporting this young woman, agreeing with what she was saying, even though she hadn't put forward a clear programme. They were saying she's right, there's something wrong with this system, it's the banker's fault. A firefighter talking about his pension being cut, a worker talking about how he couldn't afford to go to the dentist, somebody else about how they were facing the sack. Ordinary working class people supporting the protest because of the burning anger that exists underneath the surface to some extent still in Britain, but is bubbling up as a result of the situation that they face. There's an opinion poll come out from The Guardian today which gives 77% support for the N30 strikes. That gives you some idea of the level of popular anger that exists in Britain at the moment. Now, what does that mean for us? It means we have growing opportunities as the Socialist Party. There are times in history where no matter how hard you work, no matter what you do, you cannot move history forward an inch. This is most certainly not one of those times. Globally, we have entered a period of mass struggle, of revolt, of revolution, an era in which, in countries where we have a base in the Committee for Workers International, we can act to move history forward. As Rob and Chris and the other speakers have explained, we've been able to do that in Britain, in the role we played acting as a lever to try and make sure that the N30 strike takes place. And we have to keep the pressure on the union leaders there and, of course, also begin to raise escalation beyond November the 30th. But in a different way, you can also see the role that we've been able to play in the course of the Jarrah March. The Jarrah March was the idea of young Socialist Party members who then came together with other trade unionists, appealed to the movement and made the march a reality. It's not yet created a mass movement of young people against unemployment, but it has clearly laid the foundations for it. as we saw on the demonstration that took place yesterday. And it's had huge popular support, above all from working class people. But as Dave reported, celebrities as well, including the Fonds, have also given their support to the march. What's interesting is where even the capitalist media, where journalists have actually met the marchers, they've given overwhelmingly favourable, they've been inspired by the young people that are marching. It's only those that have put out Tory press releases without going anywhere near the march that have slagged it off. But even there, that is a badge of honour. When you start to be attacked by the capitalist media, it means that you're having an impact. But the point for us is why have they been able to have their success? We've put Youth Fight for Jobs on the map. We've recreated the Jarrow March. But the most important thing Jarrow has been able to do is begin to raise at least elements of a socialist programme amongst a mass audience. The reason the marches are so inspiring is because amongst this gloom, there is no alternative, there's nothing you can do. They are young people who got up on national television and said, yes, there is something that can be done, and have put forward a programme for mass house building, job creation and so on. And it's that has had such a big effect and made it a success. Indicated, by the way, in another small way, that in the media reports today, the St Paul's protesters who were kettled yesterday all say the reason they were marching is because they were trying to get to the Jarrow demonstration in order to give their support to it. Now, what do we have to do going away from today? Perhaps have a little bit of sleep, first of all, before we do anything else. But after that, of course, we've got to build for November the 30th. We want to make sure that there are mass demonstrations in every town and village when the strike takes place. But we also want everybody here to go back to your school, to your college, to your workplace and argue the case for socialism. Put forward socialist demands. Link the day-to-day struggles to the case for changing society. Because if we do that, we can have an effect. We are in an era where it's possible to considerably build support for socialist ideas. That's not to say it's always going to be easy. There is still a big gap between the objective reality of the crisis of capitalism and the consciousness, the understanding of working class people about the possibility of fighting for a different system. But that gap is being closed by objective events and also by the work that we do as a party. I'm very cautious about drawing any more comparisons with the Jarrow March. Most of all because we're not suggesting you've got to walk home or your job in your branch when you get back is to walk around a lot or anything like that. But while it's not easy, building the Socialist Party will be extremely rewarding. I bet if you talk to every single one of those marchers, they would all say there had been at least one moment where they thought, I can't take another night on the church hall floor. I can't take another night of the other marchers snoring. I can't take another night or another day of being asked by a TV film crew to walk up and down the same strip of road 20 times so they can get the right shot to put on the TV. But you ask all of the marchers what they feel now they've achieved that march, taken a place in history, helped, as Rob said, to retie the knot of history and to begin to build a mass movement amongst young people. All of them, rightly, are immeasurably proud of what they've done. We can all also play a role in changing history by building the Socialist Party. The famous poet Wordsworth once said, at the time of the French Revolution, it was a joy to be alive, to be young was very heaven. Well, I can't say that I'm young, but it is a period now where it's a joy to be alive, because we will have opportunities to not just have socialist ideas as the property of a small minority, but to begin to convince the working class, the mass of the working class, of socialist and also of Marxist ideas. There will be opportunities for the working class to change society and to build a new democratic socialist order. As was said yesterday, in Greece, workers objectively have already had those opportunities. But what they lack is a party that is worthy of them. What we are building here is the foundations of such a Party. We don't have unlimited time, but we appeal to everybody. Join us in that struggle, redouble your efforts, and let's build the Socialist Party into a party of many thousands over the course of the coming months and years.